Welcome to Master Your Mistakes. Today we have Adam Swersky. Adam was CEO of Social Finance. Social Finance created the Social Impact Bond, which is about designing and scaling solutions to social problems. Adam's going to tell us about some of the mistakes and challenges that he encountered as CEO, and also tell us a little bit about what the company does and what he's been doing since. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here.
Cool. Okay, Adam, what is the first mistake or challenge that you'd like to tell us about today?
Well, I'll talk about my time as CEO of Social Finance. And it's maybe worth giving a bit of context. Social Finance was founded in 2007. It's a non-profit, very much part of an era when we were looking at innovative ways of bringing people who wanted to drive social innovation that was going to deliver really powerful outcomes, particularly in areas of complex social need, and match them to people who wanted to invest in a way that delivered some financial return, but also social impact as well. So it's kind of part of a generation of that social innovation. And, had some good success. I joined in 2014 and continued to grow. And I became CEO in 2022, just during that kind of post-COVID period, which was complex for many reasons, as you can imagine. But actually, it was a great time for us. We were experiencing what quite a lot of other firms experienced, it's a bit of a post-COVID bounce. So we were growing quickly. We were adding new capabilities, particularly around digital, for example, and growing in some of the areas that I had helped to grow previously, particularly supporting people with health issues into employment. It was an area that had been a strong growth for us. So we continued down that path for some time, but we hit some pretty big bumps in 2024. And again, it was more or less the same time as a lot of firms that were seeing a really fast rates of growth suddenly had that growth kind of come to a period of stagnation. And in professional services, that roller coaster is deeply, deeply unhelpful, because at the end, you've got your essentially fixed cost base, you've got your recruitment pipeline, your talent pipeline that you're bringing up, and part of that is driven by a pretty kind of fixed idea of how you're going to grow over a period of time. So we had to deal with that business challenge, a period of really great uncertainty, and also really rapid change in our environment.
Mm-hmm. Quick question, for context. Your journey at Social Finance, how did your trajectory go, from joining to becoming CEO?
Yeah, so I joined from consulting, where I'd spent a few years at BCG. And, I joined at a time when Social Finance had kind of brought together people from banking background, from government, and from the voluntary sector, but didn't have many ex-consultants. And it was really looking at, the models that had been put in place around these social impact bonds. They were, finance-led models and about building partnerships with the voluntary sector. But actually, quite quickly, they were starting to become vehicles to also advise government, foundations, local government, central government, international donors as well, on how to address some of these complex problems. So my skills actually found quite a good home, and I was really lucky to be part of that part of Social Finance's journey. I came in as an associate, worked on a range of projects, but I was particularly lucky to be handed a brief by my boss at the time, who said, he'd always had this really strong interest in this issue of people who were out of the labour market, out of work, with a health issue or a disability, because that had just been a very persistent problem from a sort of public policy perspective, and it's a bit of a triple whammy. Because being out of work is really bad for individuals, both in terms of income, but actually also for mental health and well-being perspective and overall health. It's bad for the government directly, because obviously it means them paying out benefits and foregoing tax revenues. And then it's also bad for the economy and society, because you're wasting a talent that could be well deployed. And so I started looking at that problem, and amongst other work that I was doing, and we developed a social impact bond in that very field, and it became one of the more interesting in the portfolio of social impact bonds that we did. But that area started to grow and grow in terms of public interest, and a few things happened. In 2016, the NHS recognized that employment was a really important part of people's mental health recovery, and in particular that the model that we were working with, which is a really well-evidenced model, was a very effective way to help people who were receiving mental health services to find employment and support their recovery journey. So that was a big kind of marker in the sand that the work that we've been doing was now recognized nationally, and that we were going to be part of helping that that growth. And then there's only been growing interest in this issue of what we call economic inactivity, people out of work with health issues, disabilities, and related barriers. And it's become, headline news since COVID. And it got to the point in 2023 when Jeremy Hunt, he had these two fiscal events. He had a budget and a spring statement, and in both of those, he put tens of millions of pounds of additional funding into scaling up this model. And so, I was very fortunate to be working in this area at a time when it was a growing public interest.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And in terms of you then moving into this CEO position, how did that come about?
Yeah, so at this point, by the point we got to, let's say 2021, the area that I've been building, this issue of health and employment, was becoming a more significant part of social finance's overall portfolio. And we worked with the NHS and Department of Work and Pensions to launch a national program in 2019 called IPS Grow, which IPS being the intervention that helps people into work. And it's a national program supporting this scale up of all these IPS employment services within mental health teams across the country. So that was a large team within social finance. It was a large new program, and I was driving that forward and leading that effort. And I started to grow my areas of responsibility. And then in late 2021, our CEO, who had been there for 12 years, he had been an incredible guy. He'd really taken social finance to where it had got to. He decided that he was stepping down, and I threw my name into the ring.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think you got it? Why do you think you were chosen by the process?
I feel like the right answer to that is you have to ask them.
With no humility.
No humility. I mean, I think obviously having worked my way up internally meant that I had a very strong understanding of the dynamics of the organization. And this is really, there is this world of non-profit social innovation organizations. It's quite niche, but it is a very particular kind of model where you are running a pretty commercial model. In the end, 99% of our income was earned income. So we were funded through projects and programs, through foundations, central government, local governments, national donors. So we had to earn our keep. But we were non-profit, mission-driven, which meant that we were constantly reinvesting in impact, and we weren't making big surpluses. So you're running this very, very thin margin and very thin line between being sufficiently commercial to make the numbers stack up and pay everyone's salaries at the end of the month, but also being really true to that impact vision and the ultimate mission of the organization. And I think having spent 8-9 years by the time I became CEO in the organization, I had a pretty sort of intuitive understanding of that and some thoughts about how we could take it further. And then, of course, having also built a big team from scratch in the organization, I think gave me some credibility as well.
Mm-hmm. And moving into that leadership position, is there anything that from your career up to that point, either people you'd seen or people you'd worked for, that you thought, I do not want to be like that person? These are the mistakes I want to avoid. Were there any kind of rules of thumb or heuristics that you had regarding that?
I mean, that's interesting. I think that I think you have to be authentic to yourself when you're in a leadership position. And if anything, one of my key errors in life is that I take a lot of advice. I'm an extrovert in that Myers-Briggs sense of getting energy from talking to people and wanting to solve problems by talking to people. So I talk to a lot of people, and I hear a lot of opinions. And the thing about leadership is that actually in some ways it doesn't really matter what direction you go. You need to just pick a direction, and then hopefully people follow you in that path. So I think that I have always wanted to bring people along with me. I've always wanted to, operate by consensus where possible and be very approachable. Have an open door. I would meet with every new person in the company. I would have a 15-minute conversation with. If someone wanted to have coffee with me, doesn't matter what their rank, I would do so. These things all sound great. Well, I think intuitively they sound like very positive things, but they all have risks around them as well. I think actually as a leader, and so I think I wanted to be that kind of leader, but equally I think you just need to be quite aware of where that blends into being, say, too approachable is almost in the sense of people feeling like. They sort of lose the sense of that ultimately you are in charge and that you're going to take the tough decisions and that they're not always going to like them. I never think I got too far down that line, but I think that is the risk that you have to manage if you're going to take the style that I try to adopt.
Mm-hmm. And were there specific moments or periods where you had to switch that dial? And do you remember and do you have any examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a couple of examples. I mean, there were times, particularly on some of the, there's been obviously huge sort of cultural sensitivities particularly around that period in the sort of, what's now the early 2020s, and particularly around world events, that there was a growing expectation, particularly after essentially Black Lives Matters, that leaders in organizations are going to respond to world events. And in particular, people, social finance was the same. We were seen to have sort of under-responded to the murder of George Floyd. And so when the Russia-Ukraine war happened, I was on the front foot around that. But the risk, again, is that, when, for example, all the challenges in the Middle East starts coming through, the riots in the UK, you're starting to comment on more and more world events, and many of those events actually can be quite divisive in nature as well. So that was certainly an area where you had to be quite assertive about saying, okay, I'm taking a position, and it's going to be a tricky one, whichever, frankly, position I take. So I think the cultural issues were definitely challenging. The second was in that period of real business challenge in 2024. But I think, certainly recognized that the shift had happened, that we needed to respond to it. But I think leading through a period of heightened uncertainty, it occurred to me in just reflecting for today that one of the key things in leadership is that you've always got to be in front. Mm-hmm. And if at any point you fall a little bit behind the curve, people will sense that very quickly. And then it's a real struggle to get back out in front again. And, I think probably our Prime Minister is feeling a little bit of this at the moment. But I think that was one of the things that I really felt at that time.
Mm-hmm. And let's say there's a leader in crisis and they're not ahead on an issue, something internal or external. How do they get a grip of a situation?
I think the most important thing is you have to decide what you think is the answer. And the really tough bit is, me coming into social finance as a CEO, having been there 8 years, 9 years, I felt I had some clear answers about what I thought the direction of the organization was. When you suddenly hit a new period of uncertainty, and maybe the ways that you've been thinking about things feel like, well, are they the right ways, for the future? Suddenly you've got to reassess your own opinions and your own views about what the direction of travel is. And the truth is, in a period of uncertainty, there's no one's going to be able to tell you what the right answer is. Again, canvassing for advice, looking at the data, looking at the evidence, nothing's going to tell you what the right answer is because you are fundamentally in a period of uncertainty. You don't know how things are going to land. And the most important thing in that period, from what I learned from my own experience, is that you need to land pretty quickly, whatever you decide the answer is, and then go for it and be decisive around it. And I think if you do that well in terms of coming to a view and being really clear about it, everyone else is operating in that environment of uncertainty too, and everyone wants to see leadership, and I think they will fall behind you. But again, if there's any sense that you're not 100% sure, then people suddenly will question it, and then everyone's questioning it, and then you're falling behind again.
And thinking about the other side of that, the taking of advice, are there any specific pieces of advice that you remember taking, particularly during this period of uncertainty, that you either hugely value or you massively disagreed with?
Yeah, I mean, I think again in these difficult periods you fall a little bit on your instincts, and I have always been a consultant and advisor, and being CEO was my first and most major experience of business leadership, and so there was a piece of advice that I was falling on the instincts of being being an advisor and almost suggesting what we might do, whereas actually what was called for is action and a clear view of we're just going to do X, Y, and Z. And an environment full of people who are also, quite consultative and will come from those kinds of backgrounds, who are doing consulting type work. Everyone's very intelligent, everyone's got lots of ideas, everyone's got very clever, ways of thinking about things. I think it can be doubly hard to say, well, hang on a second, we're just going to put all that aside, we're just going to do X. But in some ways, that's exactly what was needed. So I thought that was a piece of advice that I distinctively remembered, and it probably took me longer than I should have done to really absorb.
Mm-hmm. And as a leader of a commercial organization, not non-profit, but it would still have, in some ways the kind of standard departments, sales, marketing, finance, HR, or, with its own kind of nuance. What was the balance for you of becoming an expert in those areas or challenging the experts in those areas versus, hiring people that you trust and kind of getting out their way? What is the balance there?
I think it's really tricky because I think, and particularly frankly in the public sector, there is a huge deference to expertise, and often that expertise is, sometimes a bit questionable. Because I think every profession has probably expanded the boundaries of their areas a bit, and then wants to sort of, what effectively has a sort of defense mechanism to say, well, hang on a second, this is HR, this is finance. No one's allowed an opinion on that. And I think you have to be able to have a debate. You have to be able to ask questions of your leaders in these areas, and they've got to be able to answer in a way that is convincing, even if it ultimately could be quite technical. It could rely on, regulations or whatever it might be, or legal precedent, but they've got to be able to explain why a certain thing is not possible or why a certain thing must be done. And if you get to the point where someone is just saying to you, I'm the expert, so just, stay out of my area, I think that does become a problem. And then, you have to question whether you've got the right people in place or that relationship is sustainable. Because, what I think is really, what I always felt was very weak as a leader is to say, well, I'm afraid we can't do X, and the only reason that we can't do it is because I've been told that it's impossible.
And thinking about the right people, when hiring someone, and then also when potentially firing someone, what is your approach in terms of what's two things on either side? Sorry, what am I trying to say? When it comes to having the right people, what are two things that you look for when hiring someone? General things. And then when it comes to, let's say, firing someone or letting someone go, what does that come down to for you? At what point is someone uncoachable or just simply not suitable for the job?
When I started BCG, I had this very corny phrase someone told me. They said, what we do here is not rocket science. Turn up on time, dress to play, which apparently was some American football metaphor. But I always loved it because I think particularly in any business environment, even something quite intellectual like sort of strategy consulting and so on, actually it really isn't rocket science. And attitude is just so fundamentally important. Yes, you've got to have the aptitude and you've got to be able to do the core of the job. But certainly when hiring, and I think of course it's symmetrical when you realize that relationship's broken down, that willingness and ability to learn, excitement, enthusiasm, someone who is you want to spend time with and want to engage with on topics and have good discussions with, I think is just so important, because just so many things are teachable on the job. I spent some of today talking about nuclear fusion with some people from who genuinely are basically rocket scientists, and some of that really is quite hard. And I'm not sure that if you are, your job is to work out how to make superconducting magnets or whatever, that that's all so teachable. And in business, a lot is teachable, and so I really believe that willingness and ability to learn is so important. And I think when when the relationship's broken down, it's usually because you got to a point where you're no longer hearing each other, and so fundamentally you don't believe things are going to change. Because if people are open to change, then everything's possible. But at a certain point, it may just be that they don't really believe in you anymore, and therefore they're not really listening to you, or you're taking your advice or your feedback, and that's their prerogative. But ultimately, you have to you have to make the relationship work.
Interesting. As in business and as in relationships, you get to a point where you're not hearing each other anymore. So
Communication is always the heart of these things.
I'm thinking about how moving into this position impacted the rest of your life. Both being CEO and as you and during your trajectory at social finance, you're also a Labour Party councillor as well. What is that like, and how were there any crossover lessons between two completely different areas, politics and being CEO of a company?
Well, I think that there was a lot of crossover at the time, and I was very lucky to do those two roles. So I was a councillor for 8 years, which was essentially the period of my social finance tenure before I was CEO. It would have been tricky to do it, I think, while I was. For starters, we were working on lots of public policy problems with local central government, NHS and so on at social finance. And, I had the opportunity to see the full sweep of what councils do as a local councillor. So, from a basic level of subject matter expertise, it was hugely helpful. There was an awful lot of insight I got from the council experience. I've always felt with politics that there's a lot of people who are really interested in policy, who say, I'm really interested in policy, so I want to become a politician. And my advice to them is always just think very carefully about it, because there's lots of roles in the world that are involved in policy. You can become an advisor, you can go to civil service, think tanks, and so on. But politics is a tribal business. Politics is fundamentally about how do we manage to operate in society without basically killing each other. And we do that by, forming tribes and then, agreeing the kind of rules of the game and working out how to talk instead of, George rather than war. And so that is a really different, it's deeply human, and it is really, really different to, coming up with great ideas for, the next sort of tax reform. And so I really enjoy that very visceral experience of knocking on people's doors and engaging with them on their terms. And I always said, people have lots of different views. Some of them, views that, would feel quite strange. But everyone's allowed to have their views. They're not running for council. They're not running for parliament. And so you need to be able to engage with them on their terms. And lecturing to people certainly is not a good way of doing that. So I think there's a lot to be learned, of course, from that. And then, just in terms of, I guess, leadership lessons, politics is, of course, about, building alliances and finding ways to frame issues and ultimately, using influence to get things done more than hard power. And I guess that's another sort of, piece of advice that I would have taken into my CEO role always is that, and my experiences coming from my experience as a consultant, is that you may have some more levers to use, whether you're in politics or a leadership position, but it's always better to make things happen through influence and persuasion.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And now, again, thinking about the whole theme, mistakes. During this period, looking back on it, is there anything that you really would have done differently?
In terms of the social finance periods,
yes.
Particularly. Yeah, I mean, I think the absolute key one is to come to a firmer view in this period of uncertainty. To come to a firmer view quicker.
And just to really nail down this period of uncertainty, you gave the kind of story at the start. It was doing really well, had a trajectory, had to contract. What does that kind of mean in practice for someone that doesn't really know the organization?
Yeah, I mean, look, in any kind of professional services organization, you're always looking at your kind of pipeline of future work, and it's always based on a forecast. I mean, in any business, of course, it's based on a forecast. But in some sense, in this environment, you're as good as your next sort of set of projects. Many organizations in this kind of world operate on, in 6 weeks' time, in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, people are going to start coming free, and you need new projects. So once that sort of level of new projects, reduces, you have to very quickly answer. It doesn't take long before you have to answer some really important questions about: is there a fundamental shift in our markets? What is that? Is this a short-term thing? Did we just price a couple of things? What's really going on here? And everyone will have a different view about that. And of course, you don't know the answer, and it only resolves itself, maybe months later. But that's way too long to wait before you've taken action to then get back on a sort of sustainable footing. So that's exactly the point where you're waiting for the resolution through. Well, maybe the last bit didn't work out, but the next one will, or maybe the next one won't, and then it will tell us actually, central government is not doing any work until the election or whatever it might be. So you're always kind of you'd love to know, but you don't know, and so you need to take a view quicker, and risk being wrong, but actually better to be decisive and wrong sometimes. I think is probably my lesson, because again, everyone is waiting, for leadership to go in a direction, and you don't have the liberty of saying, well, let's just sit around for a little bit longer and find out what happens. Mm-hmm. I don't want to overcharacterize that period, but I think if there's anything that I would have leaned more into, it is just taking a view earlier.
Makes sense. And then as you came to the end of that period, when it comes to passing the torch to the next person, how did you find that? What was that like?
Yeah, well, I was what I was really, really glad about towards the end of 2024 is that we got the happy ending for that period from a social finance perspective. And you realize in business that no one's guaranteed a good outcome in the end. Things can just go wrong and do in business all the time. But we won an extremely significant contract actually linked again to this large expansion of employment provision. Other parts of the business were also picking up. We were just getting ourselves back on our feet. We had a clear strategy. Again, having gone through a difficult period, actually, there was a lot of buy-in to the new strategy that I developed with the team and the board. And so I feel like I left it in a really good place. Having gone through a period of where we lost some money, we then went into a period of good profitability. So again, I felt very good about handing over at that point, because I felt actually the organization is in a good place. And I think in the end, you sort of want to. Yeah, the thing that is cognitively burdensome, if you like, about leadership is that you're obviously, you feel that the organization's on your shoulders, and of course, maybe it's not healthy to think about that too much, but nonetheless, I think everyone does, and that means that you're always thinking about it, sort of 24/7, and you feel a deep sense of responsibility to it. So being able to hand it on in a good position is, was a privileged ending, if you like.
Makes sense. And then what came next for you after that? And, what's next for you now? What is your big kind of focus?
Well, I'd like to say, it was a 6-month backpacking around South America, which was, very much on the cards. But I was very lucky to have an opportunity that came up just as I was leaving social finance. Again, I planned a bit of a break, a bit of a pause, but an opportunity came up I couldn't decline to, in a way, practice some of the ideas that we've been talking about at social finance, and take on an interim job as the Director of Skills and Employment at a new regional authority, the East Midlands Combined County Authority, which covers Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Derby and Nottingham. And that was an opportunity to really see whether we could make a difference by bringing together this kind of skills system, employment provision and health in a region and really try and make a dent in some of those economic inactivity figures. So it was an only 9-month position while they were recruiting the permanent role, but I really enjoyed having my first experience in the public sector and a chance to see that in more detail. And as I was kind of alluding to earlier, some really great opportunities out of that. One of the projects that we were looking at is the development of the UK's first prototype fusion plant, which is going to be built in North Nottinghamshire. And so,
could you describe what that means?
Yeah. So the UK is putting some serious investment behind fusion energy. So the energy that you get from fusing hydrogen atoms, which is the way that the sun is powered. And if we can crack that, then that is effectively an unlimited supply of plentiful, clean energy for the Earth. So there's a really major effort in the UK underway, and there've been various experiments done before, but now there's going to be an actual prototype plant generating power in North Nottinghamshire.
That's massive. I didn't know that, and I reckon there are a lot of people who don't know that sort of forefront of science is happening in Nottinghamshire.
Well, exactly, and our job was to pull together a partnership to ensure that people in the region get access to the skills that they need in order to access the jobs coming out of that program, and also to make sure that the program has access to the talent that it needs to accelerate and deliver on the timescales. So it's such an inspiring opportunity for people in the East Midlands to be able to play a really powerful role, both getting high quality access to high quality work, and playing a really big role in this breakthrough energy source, which could be the way the world powers itself in future. So it's an exciting program.
That's cool. That's really cool. And now, away from your career, big broad look at your life.
Yeah.
What is the advice that you wish you'd known coming out of university, or you would give to someone coming out of university now?
Well, I mean, Jesse, thinking about today, I realized that the biggest mistake of my career was oversleeping for a critical, an important meeting with my boss's boss and lots of clients when I had all the materials in my backpack. And so my biggest piece of advice is learn how to use the layered system of alarm clocks that, where there's always backup. No, look, I mean, I think that it's obviously the world changes so quickly, and it's so trite to say that, the only thing that we can all do is stay, what was the Steve Jobs said, stay hungry, stay curious. The number one, actually, I'll tell you one thing that I heard once, which I really, really liked. It was a BCG partner who was asked, it's one of these sort of in-town newsletters, kind of Q&A, was asked, why have you stayed at BCG so long? And he said, every Christmas, he does a bit of soul searching, and he says, do I believe that I learned more in the last year than I would have learned anywhere else? And do I believe that in the next year, I'll learn more staying than I would by going? And as long as the answers to those questions are yes, he continues to stay. And I tested myself with social finance because I was there 11 years. And every time I thought, maybe am I stagnating, something would come along and actually give me a real opportunity to learn and grow. And I think if you are learning and growing in your life, then what more is there? Not just because it's kind of good for your career, because frankly, isn't that kind of part of having a good life?
Excellent. And now the other side of the spectrum, yourself in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
What advice do you think your future self would give you now?
Well, this could go many ways. I mean, I think one thing they could say to me is, it would be similar advice to what I've been talking about today, which is there's lots of uncertainties in the world. You just need to dive in and go for something and not worry too much about whether it's the right thing, because it's a bit like relationship advice I heard. It's not about choosing the right person; it's about choosing someone and making it right. And I think that's true.
Interesting. I'd not heard that.
There you go.
Not heard that.
There you go. And I think there's a lot to be said in life. I think you can't overthink. You can very much overthink decisions, and often it's about taking a decision and then you figure out how to make that work. And so my 10 years time, they may look back and say, come on, just make some decisions. But at the moment, I'm very happy and not making too many decisions.
And then final question, what is your favorite quotation and why?
My favorite quotation, I feel like I genuinely need to think about this one.
Yeah, for sure.
So many quotations. Am I allowed to pause and...
100%.
Favorite quotation?
It can be pithy and trite, or it can be profound and misunderstood.
Well, I have many favorite quotations, but I was reading recently a kind of interpretation of Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage, and a kind of Buddhist interpretation of it. Say, if we actually treat all the world as a stage, and we are just all playing our part, then you can worry less about life and enjoy more.
Cool. I like that. Has a nice kind of cinematic sprinkle to it as well. Cool. Adam, really appreciate your time. Super interesting.
Such a pleasure. Thanks, Jesse.